Grab whatever jar of instant coffee is sitting in your cupboard right now, because there's a real chance it's about to show up on this list, and depending on where it lands, that might be either very good news or a little bit of a wake-up call. A professional taste test recently put 9 of the biggest instant coffee brands in America head-to-head in a genuinely rigorous side-by-side comparison. Every brand was tested using the recommended serving size, brewed with clean spring water so nothing about the water itself could skew the results, and sampled 2 different ways, once completely black and once with cream added, to see how each one held up either way. A handful of brands even claim they can be dissolved in cold water for iced coffee, so those got a second round of testing in cold water too, just to see if that claim actually holds up in practice. The judging came down to 4 things: how the coffee smelled straight out of the jar, the texture and consistency of the granules, how easily and completely each one actually dissolved, and weighted above everything else, how it actually tasted in the mug. And the results were not what most people would expect walking into this. Some of the brands that dominate the most shelf space in grocery stores across the country, the names you'd recognize instantly from across the aisle, landed dead last. Meanwhile, a couple of brands most shoppers walk straight past without a second glance turned out to be the ones actually worth bringing home. Today, we're counting down all 9, from the one you should seriously think twice about buying again, all the way to the one that genuinely earned its spot back in the pantry. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly which jar to skip next time you're standing in that aisle, deciding between a dozen nearly identical options and which one might genuinely surprise you enough to change your morning routine. Before we get into the countdown, it's worth understanding quickly how instant coffee is even made, because that process ends up mattering a lot once we start talking about texture and taste. Instant coffee starts out as completely normal roasted coffee beans, ground, and brewed with water into a concentrated coffee extract, essentially a much stronger version of a normal cup. From there, that liquid concentrate gets turned into the dry granules or powder you actually see in the jar through one of 2 methods. The first, and by far the more common method across the industry because it's fast and inexpensive, is spray drying, where the concentrate gets sprayed in a fine mist into a chamber full of hot air, causing the water to evaporate almost instantly and leave behind small, light granules. The second method, freeze drying, takes considerably longer and costs more to produce, but tends to preserve more of the coffee's original flavor and aroma. In this process, the concentrate is flash frozen at extremely low temperatures, then placed inside a vacuum chamber where the ice is removed directly, skipping the liquid stage entirely in a process called sublimation. That difference in method is a big part of why some of these 9 brands taste noticeably closer to a fresh brewed cup, while others taste unmistakably like, well, instant coffee. Keep that distinction in mind as we go, because it comes up again and again throughout this countdown. We're starting at number 9, dead last on the entire list, Maxwell House. This is one of the most recognizable names in American coffee, a brand that's been sitting on supermarket shelves for generations and has built an entire identity around being a dependable, familiar, everyday cup. But when it actually came time to crack open the jar for this test, the first impression was rough. The very first sniff produced an odd, almost chemical smell, not exactly what you'd hope for from a coffee brand with this much history behind it. The texture itself was fairly standard for the category, a mix of fine to medium granules that dissolved without requiring too much effort or stirring. But even after a good stir, a noticeable layer of undissolved coffee sludge stubbornly stuck around at the bottom of the mug, which is never a pleasant thing to encounter partway through drinking a cup of coffee. And unfortunately, the taste didn't recover from that rough start. Described as a medium to dark roast, it came across tasting distinctly burnt, and that burnt quality didn't get meaningfully masked even once cream was added. On top of that, there was an unpleasant stale aftertaste that lingered well after each sip, the kind of flavor that makes you wonder exactly how long that jar had been sitting in a warehouse or on a shelf before it ever made it into a shopping cart. Out of every single brand tested in this comparison, Maxwell House is the one that ended up dead last, and based on how consistently these issues showed up across smell, texture, and taste, it wasn't a particularly close call either. Number 8. Folgers. Another genuinely massive, instantly recognizable household name, and to be fair, one that actually performs quite respectably when it's brewed the traditional way through a regular drip coffee maker at home. The instant version, though, tells a noticeably different story. It comes across as medium-bodied, but both the smell straight out of the jar and the eventual taste in the mug lean noticeably burnt, and that burnt quality is really the core issue that dragged its overall ranking down. On the positive side, the granules did dissolve fairly well with just a bit of stirring, and there was meaningfully less leftover sludge at the bottom of the mug compared to Maxwell House, which counts as a genuine point in its favor, even if it's a fairly low bar to clear. Adding cream helped mask some of that burnt edge, though only slightly, not nearly enough to fully redeem the cup. If you already have a jar of this in your pantry and don't want it to go to waste, it's probably better suited as an ingredient in recipes, or blended into mixed coffee drinks where other flavors and ingredients can help cover for that underlying bitterness rather than being sipped on its own, black. Number 7. Juan Valdez. This is one of the few brands on the entire list that uses freeze drying instead of the more common spray drying method, and that difference is immediately visible the moment you open the jar. The granules here are noticeably larger, and the color is lighter than almost every other brand in this comparison. The smell alone raised genuine expectations right from the start. A pleasant, light coffee aroma that suggested something better than average was coming. It also dissolved cleanly and completely, leaving absolutely no leftover grounds sitting at the bottom of the mug, a small but genuinely satisfying detail. Unfortunately, the taste itself didn't quite live up to that promising first impression. It came across a little harsh, almost dirty in flavor, with an old or stale aftertaste that lingered noticeably even after the coffee had cooled down. Adding cream smoothed some of that roughness out considerably, and it would work perfectly fine mixed into a recipe or a flavored coffee drink, but tasted on its own, it landed somewhere in the realm of simply okay rather than genuinely good. Number 6. Starbucks. This lands almost exactly in the middle of the pack, which feels somewhat fitting given how the brand is generally perceived, solid but unremarkable in this particular format. The granules here are extremely fine, almost powder-like in appearance, deceptively delicate looking compared to some of the coarser options elsewhere on this list. Starbucks specifically markets this instant coffee as being dissolvable directly in cold water for a quick iced coffee, a fairly bold claim given how fine those granules look. In practice, though, that claim didn't entirely hold up under testing, since small, stubborn clumps stuck around even after a genuinely fair amount of stirring with a spoon. As for the actual taste, it leaned a little bitter, but came across surprisingly smooth overall, resulting in a perfectly decent cup, even if it didn't taste quite as dark or bold as the packaging and branding might lead you to expect. It's not a brand that inspires much genuine excitement either way, but it's serviceable enough, particularly if you're using it in a blended drink where more vigorous mixing happens anyway and can help work out those stubborn clumps. We're officially halfway through this list. If you've made it this far, drop a comment letting me know which of these 9 brands is currently sitting in your kitchen cabinet right now, because I'm genuinely curious how many of you are about to pause this video and go check. And if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and consider it, along with hitting that notification bell so you don't miss the next deep dive into what's actually worth buying at the grocery store versus what's just taking up shelf space. Now let's move into the top 4, the brands that genuinely earned their spots near the top of this list. Number 5. Nescafé Taster's Choice. This holds a genuinely significant piece of coffee history behind it, having been the very first freeze-dried instant coffee to ever hit store shelves, all the way back in the 1930s, decades before most of the other brands on this list even existed. And remarkably, it's remained a fairly consistent, dependable product across all that time, which earns it a solid, comfortable spot right in the middle of this ranking. The smell straight out of the jar is notably light, almost immediately and unmistakably recognizable as classic instant coffee, for better or for worse, depending on your personal taste preferences. The flavor itself carries that familiar, slightly stale character that has, over the decades, practically become the unofficial signature of the entire instant coffee category as a whole, and it leaned a bit burnt once cream got added into the mix. A little oddly for a brand with this much history and this much production experience behind it. A few undissolved grounds still lingered stubbornly in the mug even after a proper stir, a small but genuinely noticeable flaw. Number 4. Café Bustelo. Marketed specifically and deliberately as an instant espresso rather than a standard cup of instant coffee, and it genuinely delivers exactly what that label promises right from the first sip. It carries a deep, medium to dark body with real, noticeable intensity behind it, distinctly setting it apart from the lighter, more diluted options ranked below it on this list. The texture itself actually resembles coarse ground coffee more than the typical fine instant granules you'd expect, and despite that coarser texture, it dissolved easily with only minimal stirring required. Even once cream got added to the mug, it held onto its bold, rich character rather than getting watered down or washed out, which is genuinely more than can be said for several of the brands ranked lower on this list. If you personally like your coffee strong and assertive, this is a genuinely solid espresso-style pick worth seeking out, though it might come across as too intense or heavy for anyone who generally prefers something lighter and more mellow in the mornings. Number 3. Black Rifle Coffee Company. Sold in individual single-serve packets rather than the traditional jar format used by most of the rest of this list. This one carries a medium body that still resembles a classic instant coffee experience overall, but with noticeably less of that stale, artificial instant character that plagues the majority of the brands ranked below it here. It dissolved easily and quickly in hot water with barely any stirring required at all, and it also held up impressively well when prepared cold, genuinely retaining its coffee flavor rather than turning thin and watery the way plenty of instant coffees do once ice gets involved. Overall, it's smooth with a satisfying bit of a kick behind it, and adding cream genuinely brings out its best qualities, making it a legitimately strong option whether you're drinking it hot in the morning or iced in the afternoon. Number 2. Mount Hagen. This particular brand sets itself apart from the rest of the pack before you've even cracked open the jar, carrying both Fairtrade and organic certification prominently on its label. To be fair, certification alone never automatically guarantees quality on its own. Plenty of certified products still underdeliver on taste. But in this specific case, the actual taste genuinely backed up the credentials behind it. It's freeze-dried, just like a couple of the other higher-ranked brands on this list, with medium-sized granules and absolutely no powdery inconsistency mixed in throughout the jar. Once fully dissolved in hot water, it tasted remarkably close to a genuinely fresh brewed cup of coffee rather than the instant category it technically, legally belongs to, bold and smooth, and it paired beautifully alongside cream without losing any of that character. The one real hiccup worth mentioning is cold water performance, where it clumped stubbornly, no matter how much or how thoroughly it got stirred. But for a hot cup, which is presumably how most people are actually going to drink their morning coffee anyway, it's genuinely one of the strongest, most impressive options on this entire list. And that brings us, finally, to number 1, Pilon. Of every single jar tested in this entire comparison, none of them delivered a more genuinely convincing case for instant coffee as a category than this one did. It opens with a light, genuinely fresh coffee smell rising straight out of the jar, immediately setting a different tone than most of the competition. Its texture looks considerably more like coarse ground coffee meant for traditional brewing than the typical fine instant granules found throughout the rest of this list. It dissolved almost immediately upon contact with hot water, with zero leftover sludge or grounds settling at the bottom of the mug, making it the fastest and cleanest dissolving option out of the entire lineup by a meaningful margin. But the taste is really where it truly separates itself from every other brand on this list. It's rich without ever tipping over into heavy, genuinely smooth from the very first sip, with just the right amount of natural acidity to keep it interesting, landing closer to a fresh brewed cup of coffee than anything else tested in this entire comparison. It's honestly the kind of coffee that quietly disappears from the mug before you even fully register how much of it you've already had. And that's the complete lineup, from Maxwell House struggling badly at the very bottom of the list, all the way up to Pilon quietly claiming the top spot that most people watching this probably never would have predicted going in. If there's one genuine lesson worth taking away from this entire countdown, it's that brand recognition and shelf space simply don't necessarily line up with what's actually sitting inside the jar. Some of the most heavily advertised, most instantly recognizable names in American coffee finished dead last in this blind, side-by-side comparison, while a couple of brands that most shoppers walk right past without a second glance turned out to be the ones genuinely worth bringing home and adding to your regular rotation. Which of these 9 brands is currently sitting in your kitchen right now? Be honest, down in the comments. I genuinely want to know how this list lines up with what people are actually drinking. And if this video changed how you're planning to shop for instant coffee next time you're standing in that aisle, go ahead and subscribe, because there's a lot more sitting on grocery store shelves out there that genuinely deserves a second, closer look before you toss it into your cart out of habit.